watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Monday evening. Hope everybody had a good Sunday yesterday, worshiping our Lord Jesus Christ. We are going to be continuing our series here, lectures by Dizon on basics of biblical Hebrew. We're going to be doing construct nouns and prepositions, among other things today, but I'll let Lewis tell you more about that. But first, how are you, Lewis? Welcome back to the show.
It's been great. The days are starting to get shorter, so I'm getting used to that fall rhythm.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's getting a little bit cooler over here. I'm enjoying it, so I'm starting to feel the fall.
Well, if you live this far north, you wouldn't be enjoying it nearly as much.
Oh boy, well, yeah, I can only imagine in Canada. Yeah, it's a little bit different here in Louisiana. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. As usual, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'll be here listening, but I'll be off the screen. And if you want to share your screen, I'll go ahead and
sure. Let me just
put it on
activate
there.
All right, is share screen working? There you
go.
Excellent. So just like with last time, we'll start off with some translation work. So I don't know how many of you guys watching this actually bought the workbook and grammar. So there's only so much that you can get out of watching somebody do this stuff on a screen and talk about it. Like, the best way to learn a language is to actually get your hands dirty, metaphorically speaking, by doing translation exercises. So if you really want to learn the language, I suggest get the workbook and the textbook. And the most economical way to get that is through Verbum, which I did right here. So those of you who were with us last time will recall that we started translating the Joseph stories from Genesis. So we translated the first 17 verses, and now we're going to get to verses 18 to 36. So I will explain what each word is as we encounter it for the first time, and hopefully we'll make sense of this. All right. So let's begin. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Nope. Okay, verse 18. Vayir'u ha'achim et Yosef ba'od hu al haderech, vayachshavu al Yosef ra, vayomru. So actually, okay. And the brothers saw Joseph, and again he was upon the way. Sorry, while he was still upon the way. Od can mean a couple of different things. So he, al, upon, haderech, the way, vayachshavu, and they thought, al Yosef, about Joseph, ra, evil. So they schemed something evil about Joseph, or thought something evil about Joseph. Vayamru ha'achim hine ha'cholem hazeba, and they said, the brothers said, behold, this dreamer comes. So cholem is a participle form of chalam, which means to dream. So so you translate that literally as dreamer, but it's really the one dreaming. Ba is a verb. It is he comes, and this is also it's actually a thing, participle as well. Normally its standard kal form is bo, but when it becomes a participle like this, the vav at the middle drops off. Now verse 20. Vayamru ki יהרגו את יוסף ושמו אל בור עמוק ואמרו אל יעקב כי חיה רעה אכלה את יוסף ואז כל החלומות אשר חלם יהיו אפס. And they said, for Yahargu, it's like they want to kill at Yosef. It's like kill Joseph. This is sort of an imperative form, so it's like, but really it's like let's kill Joseph and place into the well, into the deep well rather. So amok means deep. It's like place his body in the well. And they said to Jacob, and say to Jacob, because an evil animal or a bad animal, chaya means animal, ate achla et Yosef, Joseph, and then as all of the dreams which he dreamt, they will be at an end, so they'll be for nothing. Verse 21, Vayishma Reuven Vayomer lo yamut Yosef. So, and Reuben heard, and he said, may Joseph not die. Do not kill Joseph. And then verse 22, Vayomer Reuven el ha'achim ki yasimu et Yosef el bor v'lo yishpachu dam v'lo yishlochu yad al Yosef v'yachashov Reuven tov al Yosef lema'an yishlach et Yosef el Yaakov b'Hevron. So here's Reuben to the rescue, and Reuben said to the brothers, for they will put Joseph in the well, or it's like let's put Joseph in the well, and loish puhu, and let's not shed blood, and let's not lay a hand upon Joseph. Ve'yachashov, and Reuben thought good about Joseph, so that he will send Joseph to Jacob in Hebron. So here's the part where Reuben is planning to save his life. But we know how this turns out. In verse 23, Vayavo Yosef el ha'achim vayikhu et ha'ktonet min Yosef. And Joseph went to the brothers, and they took the coat from Joseph. Right? And then verse 24, Vayasimu et Yosef el bor vehabor rek ve'en mayim babor. So, and they put Joseph into the well, and the well was empty. There was no water in the well. And then we get to verse 25. Vayeshvu, vayochlu, vayir'u, vahine. Yishmaelim ba'u min Gilad al haderech el Mitzrayim. So, and they sat, and they ate, and they saw, and behold, Ishmaelites came from Gilead along the way to Egypt. So here come the Ishmaelites. So in verse 26, we got Judah, his turn to speak. Vayomer Yehuda el ha'achim ki en betza im yishpehu dam vehargu et Yosef. And Judah said to the brothers, for there is no betza, or gain, if they shed blood and kill Joseph. Verse 27. Ve'im yimkoru et Yosef bekesef la Yishmaelim ve'haya betza ve'yad lo tihye ve'Yosef ki ach hu ve'yishma'u ha'achim el Yehuda. So, and if they sell, or we sell at Joseph, if we sell Joseph for silver to the Ishmaelites, and there will be gain, and the hand will not be upon Joseph, or upon Joseph, for he is a brother, and the brothers heard or listened to Judah. So the word Shema or Yishma, it literally means hear, but it can also mean listen. So just mind that two possibilities of translating certain words such as that. So verse 28. Vayavo'u ha'anashim v'ha'yishmaelim vayikhu et Yosef min habor vayimkoru et Yosef la Yishmaelim bekasef vayavo'u Yosef el Mitzrayim. The men, the Israelites, the Ishmaelites, or the Ishmaelite men, took Joseph from the well, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. Actually, sorry, I think I mistranslated that first bit. It's like the men went to the Ishmaelites rather, and then they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for silver, and Joseph went to Egypt. So there's where the plot thickens. Verse 29. Vayelech Reuven el Habor, vehine en Yosef babor, Vaikra Reuven bekol gadol. So Reuven went to the well, and behold, there was no Joseph in the well. And Reuben cried out in a loud voice, or literally a great voice. So gadol literally means big or great, but in this context, you'd understand this to mean loud. And now I get to verse 31. Vayelech el ha'achim vayomar Yosef ein babor ayehu. And he went, or he walked to the brothers, and he said, Joseph is not in the well. Where is he? Verse 31. Vayechu et hakatonet asher leYosef vayahargu seir vayasimu dam al hakatonet. And they took the coat, which was Joseph's, and they killed a young goat, a young male goat, and they placed its blood upon the coat. Verse 32. וישלחו את הכתונת אל יעקב ויאמרו הקרנה הזאת, הכתונת אשר ליוסף אם לא. הכתונת אשר ליוסף אם לא. So they took the coat to Joseph. Literally, they sent it to Joseph, and they said, so recognize, so it's like know this, or recognize this, or identify this. There are a bunch of different ways you can express it idiomatically. The coat, which is Joseph, is this the coat which is Joseph's or not? Actually, this is actually a question. Is this Joseph's coat or not? What you will learn shortly is that the ha here is not actually a definite article. It is what you call an interrogative particle. So the letter ha can mean a couple of things. And, sorry, just froze for a sec there. We'll cover that today. All right, a few more verses. Vayomer Yaakov, hine zot hakatonet asher leYosef, chaya ra'a achla et Yosef. And Joseph said, behold, this is the coat which is Joseph's. A bad animal or a bad beast ate Joseph. Vaikra Yaakov b'kol gadol vayasem sak yamim rabim. And he cried, and Joseph cried rather, with a loud voice. Again, literally, a great voice. And he put on sackcloth. One of the fun things about Hebrew is that the word for sackcloth is literally sak. Makes it easy to remember. And he put on sackcloth yamim rabim, many days. Remember when we discussed adjectives that adjectives should agree with the noun they're modifying. So if yamim has im, so should rabim. Two more verses. Verse 35. V'yamru kol habanim habarim dvarim tovim el Yaakov, v'lo shama el hadvarim hatovim ha'ele, v'yomer ki hu yelech el Yosef bish'ol. And all of the sons said good words, or like kind words, or consoling words, but literally good words, to Joseph. And he did not hear or listen or pay heed to the good words, these good words rather. So notice that the demonstrative pronoun tends to come at the end, so you have to look ahead to know it's there. And he said, for he will go to Joseph in Sheol. So Jacob wants to see Joseph in Sheol. And then the conclusion. Ve'haishmaelim makru et Yosef el Mitzrayim le Potiphar. And the Ishmaelites sold Joseph to Egypt, or at Egypt, to Potiphar. So you can, if you've been able to follow along up to this point, then you already have an idea of how Hebrew sounds and how to do a translation of it that is properly idiomatic, but at the same time faithful to the literal meaning and word order of the text. Sometimes it's not always possible. You'll note that sometimes good idiomatic English means that we have to be a little bit loose with how we translate certain words. So, for example, Kol Gadol would literally be a great voice, but in this context, we should translate as a loud voice. But it's good standard practice to try to stick to the word order of Hebrew as much as possible, as well as find the closest equivalent in English. And we use more idiomatic or paraphrasy renditions only if really necessary. That's done. We'll get to the grammar portion of today's lesson, and we will be focusing in on chapter 7. And there are a bunch of different things on chapter 7: constructs, directional endings, prepositions, and interrogatives. So you already remembered, hopefully you all remember what we covered last week, which is vowel changes as well as noun and adjective function. So if not, try to review those things, especially review nouns and adjectives. Don't worry too much about vowel changes. It will come up again today. We will discuss some of the vowel changes, but only briefly. You don't have to worry too much about it unless you plan on learning Hebrew at a really advanced level, in which case you really will need to learn this stuff in detail, which involves memorizing with all the rules. So a construct is what we would roughly call in grammar a genitive form. So those of you who've taken Greek or Latin will be familiar with the various noun cases. So you have nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, or in Latin, the ablative. So in Hebrew, we don't use those terms very often. I'm using them primarily for the benefit of those of you who know these terms from studying other languages. But I'll try to do it minimally. So the construct noun is equivalent to what we would call a genitive noun. So a construct form is how we would say x of y in Hebrew. So anything that you can think of that would be expressed as x of y, in Hebrew, we would express that in terms of constructs. And a construct is basically a series of nouns that are mentioned together to express a common relationship. So the example given here is Melech Yisrael, which literally means a king of Israel. So Hebrew does not have a word for of, so you would have to, it is implied whenever a construct form is used. So just try to imagine the invisible of that binds these constructs together. And a construct can have any number of nouns in the sequence, but there will always be a minimum of 2. And one of the interesting things about Hebrew is that it uses construct forms in contexts where we wouldn't normally use an x of y in English. So, for example, Exodus 4:10. All right. So Moses says he is not an ish devarim. So that literally translates to a man of words. However, we don't talk like that in English. So if you see the phrase man of words in Hebrew, we would translate that idiomatically as an eloquent man. Alternately, if you want to confuse your readers, you can just translate it literally and say a man of words. So there are, as I mentioned, there are places in Hebrew where you can have multiple nouns in one construct. So the example given here, Ben Melech Eretz. So a son of a king of a land. Now, the simplest use for the construct form would be to indicate possession. So, this is the pencil of Lewis. All right. But I could also say, if I was speaking Hebrew, this is a pencil of wood. Now, obviously, the pencil is not possessed by wood. Rather, when I say a pencil of wood, I mean that this is a pencil that is made of wood. So we use in Hebrew constructs to express a number of relationships. So here are a few, relatively speaking, examples of constructs forms in Hebrew and how they're used. So I mentioned possession, that's the most common form. The temple of the Lord temple. It can also be used to denote agency. So Isaiah 53 verse 4 has the phrase stricken of God, which would mean stricken by God. You have instrument of means. So Isaiah 1:7, you have burnt of fire, which really means burned with fire. And then you have action to, by, or with someone. So 1 Kings 2:43, you have the oath of the Lord. And that's not the Lord making the oath, but rather other people making the oath to the Lord. And we know, of course, that in Genesis there's the tree of life. But obviously it's not the tree that's possessed by life. What this construct means is that it's a life-giving tree. And then purpose or result, you have the sheep of slaughter in Psalm 44:23. And that means it is a sheep to be slaughtered. So that's a few of it. We've got a few more. So advantage or disadvantage. Vengeance of his temple means vengeance on behalf of the temple. Relationship. Yonah ben Amittai, Jonah, the son of Amittai. I mean, that's kind of possession as well, if you think about it. Attribute, the mountain of my holiness in Isaiah 11:9. That means my holy mountain. So sphere, or with respect to, Isaiah 66 verse 5, you have unclean of lips, which just means unclean lips. And then we've got personal characteristics. So one of the common ways that you'll see a construct is used is to denote age. So in Hebrew, when you see the phrase a son of and then a number of years, that means he is that many years old. So a son of 100 years means 100 years old. There's many examples of this one. Classification. So in Deuteronomy 24 verse 1, you have indecency of a thing, which is basically a catch-all for any kind of indecency. And then composition. So this is when you mention the material of something. So in Exodus 20:24, an altar of earth. That has to do with an altar made of earth. Content. So Judges 6:19, you have an ephah of grain. So that tells you what is in the ephah. Topic. Isaiah 13 verse 1, the oracle of Babylon. So it's an oracle that concerns Babylon. And then superlative. So sometimes this is used to express like the most of something. So the Holy of Holies means the holiest place. Location. You have the stars of heaven. That means that the stars are located in heaven. And then with respect to those going down of the pit, Isaiah 38:18, that means going down to the pit. And then finally, measure. Ezekiel 47 verse 3, water of ankles, which means water up to the ankles. This will show you that the construct form is used much more broadly in Hebrew than it normally would be used in English. It's used in a number of contexts where in English we might normally use a different phraseology. And also, there might be places where you're wondering what kind of construct is in view. Really, that kind of thing is determined by context. You look at how it's being used in the passage it's found in, and then you determine what kind of construct are we dealing with. So there are some things to note about, some more things to note about it. So with construct endings, if we're using the first, so if the first word in the construct or any word in any noun in the construct other than the last one, if it's a plural or a feminine, it will change from its normal form. So the normal form is what we call the absolute form. So houses, in plural, would be batim. So batim is the absolute form of it. But if we were to say it in the construct form, it would be bate, as you can see here. So if we say, for example, the houses of the king, we would say bate melek. In some areas, it stays the same. So in the feminine, it's ot for both. And then in feminine singular, something interesting happens with the hey. It turns into a tav. So let's say, let me see, what would be a good example. Let's say, actually, there's one form of it in Genesis. So chaya means animal or beast. An animal of a field is chayat hasadeh. So notice that the he in chaya becomes a tav, so it becomes chayat. That is to show that it is being used in a construct form. So I'm just going to show you quickly. Genesis 1. Actually, it's not used in that form in Genesis, never mind. But in other places, that is the way it tends to be used. So the he becomes a tav. And there's a good example of the other form that I mentioned where the plural ending changes. So if you remember when we were translating the first 5 verses of Genesis, in verse 2, it says this, V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshek al panei tehom. Okay, so panei is the construct form of panim, which means like the surface. It's a little weird because panim is a singular surface, but it's phrased plural. So it'd be like the surfaces or the faces of the earth or the faces of the deep. So we wouldn't say al panim tehom, we would say al panei tehom. And then going further, V'ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim. So again, panei hamayim, not panim hamayim, but the surfaces of the water. This is a good place to show you how sometimes Hebrew will use plural forms where we might expect a singular form. Something to watch out for. And if you recall, I mentioned that vowel changes comes into play here. So when two nouns are in a construct form, then for vowel change purposes, they're treated as if they were one noun. So you would take the syllable in the second noun that is accented, and then you will modify the vowels in the first noun you'll either lengthen or shorten it according to its distance from the accent. So here's an example. So adon would be, normally it would have a kametz here. So if you are making it part of a construct here, for example, adon eretz, so all of a sudden you have one syllable here that is accented. So the rules governing how to lengthen and shorten vowels will be modified according to this. So remember, historic long vowel doesn't change, so this will stay the same. However, the distant open syllable, i.e. the one that's 2 syllables away from the accent, it reduces. So it's no longer a kametz. It is now a shva with patach on it. This particular change doesn't actually change the pronunciation. It just changes the orthography of the word, so it'll be written differently. This will serve to tell you that it is functioning as part of the construct. So it says right here, constructs are always vocalized as if they lose their accent to become part of the following word. A few other examples. So Kodesh Har. So Har normally has a kametz. However, Har Kodesh, the textbook, it has a, this should come before Kodesh. It appears to be after it, but that's because of the formatting error. So Har Kodesh. So Har is being modified according to the accent found in code. So it reduces from a kametz to a patach because a historic short vowel. Because it is a historic short vowel. And it cannot lengthen if it is right next to the accent. So a few more examples. So mention this. Ben David, that stays the same. Davar, David. So davar usually has 2 kametzes, but because it's part of a construct here, the first kametz becomes a shva. This tells you that it was a historic short vowel that got lengthened here. Here it gets reduced instead. And then here, the historic short vowel stays as it is. So some of the other rules that governs construct words. So when it comes to definiteness, it's only ever the last word in a construct chain that is considered definite. So you would never attach the definite article to any noun that's part of a construct other than the last one. So here's some examples. So Beit Ish. So this is a house of a man. Neither word has a definite article on it or a ha. You have Beit Ha'ish, the house of the man. You would never say ha Beit Ha'ish. That would be wrong grammar. You only put the ha on ish. However, rest assured that this is still definite. And then Kol Shmuel, the voice of Samuel. So Shmuel, because it's a name, it does not need the ha at the beginning to be considered definite. Notice that in a construct, the entire construct has the same definiteness. So either the whole construct is definite or the whole construct is indefinite. You can't have a construct form where part of it is definite and part of it is not. And because of this, if you wanted to express that a definite person possesses a certain one of something, you have to use a form other than a construct form. So the most common example is that phrase that's found at the beginning of most Psalms, a Psalm of David. You would not say Mizmor David because that would translate as the Psalm of David, implying that he only has one. Instead, you would say Mizmor le David. So if you were to be literal about it, you would translate this as a psalm to David, but the l there is being used to indicate possession. So not all constructs indicate possession, but also not all possessions are indicated by construct. Sometimes they're indicated with a preposition. And then there are some rules governing how adjectives are used with constructs. So you can never break up a construct chain with an adjective. You can't place it in the middle of it. You have to place it either before or after. The only time an adjective is part of the construct itself is if it's functioning not as an adjective but as a substantive, i.e., it's functioning as a noun. So the example given here, Kadosh Yisrael, the Holy One of Israel. And in this context, you do not need ha to make this definite because there is only one holy being, and that is, of course, God. So attributive adjectives and predicative adjectives have slightly different rules with regards to construct chains. If you forgot what those terms mean, once again, review chapter 6 on adjectives. So an attributive adjective, the one that is that in English we would use right before the noun, always comes at the end of the construct chain. So the example here is Bnei David hat tzadikim. So it's the righteous sons of David. So you don't place tzadikim next to Bnei, which is how you might be tempted to do it, but you place it at the end. Because if you place it in the beginning, you would basically be saying the righteous ones are the sons of David. It changes the meaning and makes it into a predicative. And then you have Bnei David HaTzadik. So this would mean the sons of David the righteous one, or sons of the righteous David. Pay attention to whether a noun, whether an adjective is singular or plural. That'll tell you which noun in the construct chain it is modifying, but not all the time, because then here you have Ben David HaTzadik. The question is Sadiq here modifying Ben or is it modifying David? The answer is that it's ambiguous. It could be either. And sometimes you'll find passages in the Hebrew Bible where translators themselves are not sure which noun is modified by the adjective. So you'll see contradictory translations of the passage. Now, predicative adjective, unlike the attributive, can be positioned on either side of the noun or the construct. So let's say the king of the land is great, not Israel. So you can say Melech Haaretz Gadol, or you can say Gadol Melech Haaretz. Either way, it means the same thing. The king of the land is great. And then, of course, there are contexts, there are situations where it could be ambiguous. There are a number of ways that you can translate the same phrase. And for example, we have Shem Ish Tov. So this could be the name of a good man, or it could be the good name of a man, or it could be the name of a man is good. Or one other possibility that's not mentioned by the textbook, you could translate this as the name of a man of a good one, of the good one. but that's a really strange and unnatural way of translating it. So I wouldn't expect you to run into anything like that. So that covers construct endings. So let's talk about the other items in this chapter. So you have directional endings. We saw that briefly when we were translating this passage from Genesis. So let me find it. There was one instance of a word having a hey at the end, but it was not a hey to indicate. So actually, no, wait, that was a different thing. That was the interrogative, which we'll run into later this chapter. The actual funny thing about this verse, I just realized, because this workbook simplifies the grammar of the Hebrew, so there are certain forms that are simplified. And one example is here where it says bishol. Now, if I recall correctly, let me take a look at how it originally read. There we go. So in the actual unsimplified form of Genesis 37:35, Jacob doesn't say bishol, he actually says sheola. So this hey at the end of sheol is what you call directional ending. It means sheol words. So it is to indicate something is heading somewhere. So here's another, Mitzrayma. That means Egypt words. So the difference between a feminine ending and a directional ending is that a feminine singular ending will take the accent. Here, for example. Directional endings never take the accent. You would never put the stress on a directional ending. Now you can put a directional ending on top of a female ending. And when that happens, the first hey, the one indicating the female ending, becomes a tav. So you have the name Tirza. Okay? If we want to say towards Tirza, we would say Tirzata. Because you can't put two heys next to each other, because that would then become Tirtsaha, which just sounds weird. Nobody would want to say that. And of course, while directional ending can appear in the middle of a chain, unlike certain other grammatical elements. So Artsa Mitzrayim, to the land of Egypt. And then we get to prepositions. There's a lot of material in this textbook, in this chapter of the textbook. So if there's a lot of stuff for you to go through, I really recommend, assuming you have the textbook, to read this through on your own. So prepositions are a very important part of Hebrew grammar. You'll run into them all the time. They come in a wide variety of ways or a wide variety of forms. And we use them in contexts where we wouldn't use them in English. And sometimes we use prepositions that you wouldn't expect to use. And sometimes the same preposition can mean different things depending on where it's used. For example, ba usually means in, but in a context like 1 Samuel 30 verse 3, Surufa Baesh, that would mean burnt with fire. Not burnt in fire, but with fire. So make note of the context in which a preposition appears in, because it's the way it's translated can change depending on the context. And there are two kinds of prepositions, roughly speaking. There are the inseparable and the separable prepositions. So the inseparable preposition is a preposition that is always attached to the noun that it is modifying. So A standalone preposition would be something like el or al. An inseparable preposition would be like le. Le would never appear on its own. It's always attached to a word. For example, lemelek, or bamelek, or kmelek. So these are the three most common that you'll see. You have in, on, with, at for b. K is like, as, or according to. Le is to or for. And they mean a whole bunch of things besides that. Like le can actually mean from sometimes. There are some contexts where it means that. And can throw some people off, but don't worry about that for now because it's rare anyway. I'm just letting you know. And then min is an interesting case because it can be separable or inseparable. You'll see examples of both. So typically, the inseparable prepositions have a schwa on them, but in certain contexts, the vowel that's attached to will change, and that's modified by what it comes after it. For example, you wouldn't say this, l'shmuel. Try saying it out loud, l'shmuel. Doesn't it sound nasty when you pronounce that way? So in Hebrew, what happens is that the shva on the lamed becomes a herek. So it becomes li shmuel. And then if the first letter of the noun it's attached to is a yod, then another interesting thing happens, which is that whatever vowel is attached to the yod, usually a shva, drops off. Actually, no, it only happens when it's a shva. So, le Yehuda. You wouldn't say le Yehuda. That's weird. So, it becomes a li again. So, li Huda, but then it still sounds a little weird. Li Huda. So, what happens with that other shva is it just disappears altogether. You end up with lihuda. Lihuda. Okay? So it's not L Yehuda, it's not Li Yehuda, it's Lihuda. And then in some contexts, the vowel on the preposition becomes something different. So two special cases would be the words Elohim and Adonai. So if we said La Adonai, the vowel on the lamed actually becomes a patach, like this. If we place it on Elohim, it becomes a segol, so Le Elohim. However, that does sound weird. La Adonai. So what happens to the other one? Once again, it drops off. Actually, it's not really just a patach. It's a shva with patach and a shva with segol. But it drops off altogether. So the final form would be Ladonai and then Lelohim. And here, one more change takes place. The segol becomes a tsere. So Lelohim. When most Hebrew speakers say it, the difference between tsere and segol tends to be reduced a bit, but they have distinct sounds because tsere has a longer e sound. So these are the vowel changes that govern prepositions. Don't worry too much about them. They'll become second nature to you because you'll encounter them often enough that you'll learn to predict them. And then prepositions with the definite article. Sometimes the preposition can attach to the definite article. 2 Chronicles 10 verse 7, you have to the people, laha'am. However, what happens more often is that the ha gets absorbed by the preposition that it comes before it. So instead of laha'am, you get la'am. So here's another example. Lahamelech will often become Lamelech. And one other example would be if we say in the heavens. If you run into that in Hebrew, you will notice that will be Ba Shamayim. So instead of Ba Shamayim, the Ha there gets absorbed by the Ba. You end up with Ba Shamayim. Even rarer would be situations where a comet is used, and this happens in a few rare cases. So Genesis 1:6, Mayim La Mayim. It's rare. Don't worry too much about it. So here's a table showing you all the rules governing how the prepositions change. So once again, typically it is a shva. When it's not a shva, it's usually because there's a shva on the first letter of the word it's attached to, and it has to change so it doesn't sound awkward. And how it changes is usually, for example, before a composite shva, it takes on the vowel that the shva is attached to, or if it is a hirek yod, sorry, if it's a yod with a shva, the shva just this becomes a hirek, and this shva disappears. And then, having covered that, we talk about the preposition min. So min is interesting because it will sometimes attach to the word that comes after it, and when it does, it changes. So the nun drops out, and the hirek becomes a tsere. So min hasadeh will sometimes become me sadeh. So actually, it doesn't always change into a tsere. My bad. Sometimes it will stay as a hirek, but other times it will turn into a tsere. So min ha'adam, so min adam becomes me adam, because it would be weird to have say mi adam, so they changed this vowel. This usually, but not always, happens when there is a definite article on the word it is attached to. So from the field, me hasadeh, you wouldn't say mi hasadeh. And one of the interesting things that Hebrew sometimes does is it'll combine multiple prepositions together. So lamin hayom is one example in Exodus 9:18. So to from the day. Again, in this context, it would just be from the day if you look at the way it's translated. This is something that seldom happens, but again, you should know that it is something that can happen. And I'll show you a few more examples of that when we translate a little bit of Genesis, which is something we'll do at the end. Before we do that, there's just one more thing that we need to cover for chapter 7, and that is interrogatives. So asking questions is something that comes up a bit. So if you are saying, for example, a yes or no question, you have what is called an interrogative particle, which is a hey with a patach at the bottom. But there's actually a shva with patach, not just ish patach, and that is how you tell it apart from a definite article. So recall when we were translating Genesis 37, the brothers say to Jacob in, let me see, it is in verse 32. Okay, Hakerna hazot haktonet asher Yosef imlo. So the word hazot, notice something about the ha next to zot. It is a patach with shva. So this whole part thing is a yes or no question. Is this the coat of Joseph or not? So watch out for that tiny little difference. If you're not reading carefully, the interrogative particle can be mistaken for a definite article, but it's that shva there that tells you that it is not. So be on the lookout for it. Now, it is sometimes also used with im. So actually, you'll see here, Haktonet Yosef imlo. So is this Joseph's coat or not? And another example, Genesis 27:21, Ha im. So are you really my son Esau or not? So that is the typical form of the interrogative particle. There's a few modifications to it that sometimes happen. So before a shva, the shva on this will drop out, becomes just a patach. And this can be very confusing because then it becomes indistinguishable from a definite article. Same thing if it's before a guttural. And if it's a guttural with a comment, it becomes a sigil. Context will usually tell you if it's a question meant. So there are a bunch of other ways of determining an interrogative. So you have the standard who, what, where, how, why, and you'll learn all of them eventually. The most common ones that you will run into will be the who, me, and then the what, which is ma, and then the why, which is lama, which is really to what if you analyze it closely. I mentioned that there are compound prepositions, which is literally like prepositions attached to each other. No, wait. Actually, there's also this case where a preposition attaches to an interrogative. And then you have things like aye and afo, which both mean where, and then matai, which means when. Those are relatively less common. We'll see a few less common I'll show you a few less common interrogatives down the road. So the word ma, typically it has ikamets, but once again, because Hebrew likes to confuse us with its vowel changes, it can also come with a patach or a sigil. Just a note, when you're memorizing these vocabulary items, always take into consideration the fact that the vowels can and do change. So the standard vowel form that you'll find may not always be the vowel that it comes with. So there are many ways to translate an interrogative sentence. So Allahu Amar is one example. So literally, is it not that he said? So you would translate this idiomatically as did he not say? Or didn't he say? Me asaham. What did the people do? So, and then mahi. What is it? So we've covered a lot of things today. So to recap, we covered construct chains or construct nouns, which indicate genitive relationships or X of Y. We covered prepositions, which shows you the relationship between various nouns. You have the directional ending, which indicates direction, and interrogatives, which indicate questions. Now we got a little bit of time left, so the last thing I want to do before we get to the chat questions is to do just a little bit more translation work. And we'll do just 3 verses. We translated day 1 of Genesis. Now let's do day 2. And as part of this, let's look for prepositions. All right. There's a few here. Vayomer Elohim, Yahi rakia b'toch hamayim, Yahi mavdil ben mayim lamayim. So, and God said, let there be a firmament or expand in the midst. So that's a preposition, b'toch hamayim, the water, and let it be a separator or a divider, ben, between water, lamayim, to water, between water and water. 3 prepositions right there, in the midst, between, and to. Verse 7, Vayas Elohim het harakia, v'yabdel ben hamayim asher mitakat larakia, uven hamayim asher me'al larakia, vahichen. Oh, we got a lot of prepositions in this one. And God did, and God made the expanse, and he divided between the water, which is from below to the expanse, and between the water, which is above. What happened? Above to the expanse. And it was so. So notice here that you've got multiple prepositions in a row. Mi, min, tahat, la. From below the expanse, from above the expanse, from upon. Actually, if you see me'al, you may be tempted to translate this as from upon, but this is more idiomatically rendered as over, so, or above, which is above la rakia, above the expanse. Vayichen. Vaikra Elohim la rakia shamayim, vayerev vayivoker yom sheni. So God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So notice something when we used rakia, this verb, and the object will have a preposition la. So you wouldn't use et like you would with most other verbs. Certain verbs require prepositions to indicate the object, and yikra or kara is one of those. So the object will have the lamed preposition. So that's it for this session. Do we have any more questions?
Looks like there is a question here. What's Lewis's view about Genesis 1:1's interpretation, popular in academia today, being translated more like when God began creating the heavens and the earth?
Yeah, there is some debate over the ve at the beginning of verse 2. So you would normally translate, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz v'haaretz. So if you take it literally, it'd be and the earth was. So you have so remember, the vav can be conjunctive or disjunctive. So there is some debate over the function of the vav in this particular passage. So some people think there's a conjunctive vav, in which case verse 2 is just elaborating upon what was happening simultaneously with verse 1. However, traditionally, this passage has been read more in terms of this being a disjunctive vav, which means this represents one sequence, this represents another sequence. And I don't really see any clear reason to regard this as conjunctive vav. To me, it seems more disjunctive. And the reason why I think that is because that's how it works in the vast majority of other instances throughout the text. You just do a read through of the next several chapters of Genesis because the ve heads up most of these verses and it's often translated that way. So unless I see a compelling reason to do something different with one specific verse, I think we should translate the same as all the others. Mm.
I don't see any other questions. So it looks like that might be it.
Right.
And
That's
what do we have to look
great.
forward to for the next one?
So for the next one, we will be covering chapter 8. And if we have enough time, I might also throw in chapter 9 with that.
Okay.
So this is, let me see, pronominal suffixes and a review of definiteness, and then a little mini chapter on how to read Hebrew more intuitively. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, looking forward to it. Lewis, we're going to have you back on soon, aren't we?
Yep, Lord
I think you're
willing.
going to be on for another topic here. Looks like it's going to be, let me check here.
The next Bible commentary, I believe, is tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. And that's going to
Amazing.
be on
We're doing Second Samuel and First
Second Samuel.
Chronicles.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're doing those two books together because they cover the same material. Um, and it's good to read those two books together because it's like reading the Gospels together. They cover the same material but from different perspectives, and it's good to know why they do it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, perfect. I'm looking forward to it. I'll send you some information about that here in just a little bit. All right. Thank
All
you so
right.
much for coming on, Lewis, and doing this. We appreciate your time. And everybody, thank you
Mhm.
for watching. Of course, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and also check us out, patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support what we're doing. All right. Till next time. God bless.